Yes. So
Yeah.
it's great pleasure for me to present Rupali Gupta, who is professor from School of Environmental Environment and Architecture in India, from Mumbai, Urbanist and Architect, who is also co-founder and a professor, right, at the Institute of CR. And when I heard her presentation about teaching methods of architecture and teaching urbanism in the conference, I was like, wow, that's the person I really want to bring to CRI, to Institute, and to actually let you all just to hear her way of also of her work, because it's actually very, very hard to teach, right, architecture, which is intrinsically very interdisciplinary, but it's also very, very hard to maybe innovate in a way methods of architecture teaching. So floor is yours. Thank you for coming. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lou, and thanks everyone for being here. So what I'm going to also present is perhaps, in some ways, something that we've been struggling with in terms of as urbanists, people who are interested in cities. In some ways, what I'm going to present is also a big shift from what we were doing maybe even 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Because in some ways we started feeling like some of the methods that we had to look at cities were in some ways insufficient, because in some ways they couldn't grasp the way one could, the life of cities, the way that cities sort of were lived as kind of lived experiences. So that's where this presentation comes from. We can sort of take it from there, and then we could probably come back to, questions and others. And I also want to say that this is based because a lot of my own research is in Mumbai. In some ways, it's also kind of the field is Mumbai, but in some ways also kind of thinking of from here, thinking of the world. Okay, so that's where we are. And it's called Trips, Kicks, and the City Live, 3 concepts to understand the city. These are 3 conceptual terms that we've been playing with to kind of start thinking of cities through. So, sorry, I don't know why it's not going ahead. Yeah. So this is one of the contentions that, our ideas of cities so far have been dominated by 2 opposing, in some ways, imaginations. Now, one is of a technological utopia supported by, what we understand as super infrastructures and robust information systems that are able to hold everything that the city kind of, has for us. So mega infrastructures and super robust information systems on the one hand, or then we imagine, its opposite, an imagination of a city that is engendered by catastrophe of environment, of poverty and deterioration. And what we're arguing is that inherent in both these imaginations of coherence and catastrophe is the idea of time as a singular linear rhythm, of space as an entity that has fixed coordinates, and of people as a homogeneous and inert mass. Okay, and we feel like probably these binaries of understanding cities are perhaps not enough. Okay, because what that does is, in many ways, both these imaginations have led to the city being imagined as a project, as a mission impossible to be undertaken. And that is something that we see more and more around, that civil society, takes up upon itself this mantle to participate in the city and fix the problems of the city, where the city is the mission. And that's something that we see particularly, I'm talking also about the South Asian context, that in some ways there is an image of what the city should be. And then there is a need to fix what you're seeing around you. And so there is a kind of militant civil society that has come together, that has started kind of looking at cleaning up measures, okay, of what they see as deteriorating environments. So this is actually an image of a promenade along the waterfront, and recently done, and you can see that it's kind of a clean promenade, but there is a kind of lack of imagination, because when it comes to right next to this kind of really posh city is a fishing village. Okay, and when it comes to the fishing village, there is no imagination of how to deal with this water edge. It kind of stops there, and it's kind of fumbles with what to do with it, because the imagination is of cleaning up and creating this kind of idea of a promenade. But what that allows is this very easy takeover of corporate capital. When you've cleaned everything, you've kind of there's corporate capital that kind of takes over the place, and then it also becomes a city that is that does not, that in some ways excludes many people who the city has traditionally absorbed. So you see all these: do not park, do not eat, do not encourage hawkers and beggars. The city was a place for the multiplicities, right? Like for many people. And so this cleaning up kind of engenders a certain imagination of who you need to exclude and who you need to include. And this is again the contention that modern planning has come through a great deal of violence, because when you're cleaning up, there's a whole sort of violence through which you operate. And that's, of course, the famous Corbusier image, sort of, that this big hand that's sort of located on the city and cleaning up. And I thought it was important also because it was the image of Paris here, right? So that's the kind of that our tools, and this is something that very much came from the way we imagined and sort of developed methods to look at cities through. Also, our tools of understanding cities, architecture, and space have been limited to maps, statistics, and standards, which are often reductive in the way they understand life. Okay, and so I have this image on the screen is of this a kind of drive to create property ownership. So everybody will have these property ownership records and cards, and this is in Bangalore, but this whole idea that you will have a legal kind of system where a GIS system where every single property is marked, and you have a sense of ownership of who, the attributes will give you all of that. But if you look at this image of the city here, there is a shop inside a shop, right? And it's come through a completely different idea of a kinship relationship. So what happens to a map which has a polygon with attributes and clear kind of ideas of ownership? It doesn't work for a city like this, which works on kinship networks, where the logic of the city is very, very different. So how do you then create this utopia of information systems when the city has a complex occupancy? So I'll get to three terms that we've been toying with then to understand this idea of the lived experience of cities. And this is the first term is called transactional capacities. So again, if you look at this is the development plan of Mumbai, and what appears as one line in the plan, when you kind of look closer and you tell the story of the city, it thickens to show a complex occupancy. So that single line is actually a thick line. It's a thick, corroded, blurred line. And if you look at this, the details of this, these are the 5 layers that make that line. Okay, so there's this building at the back, which is a residential building. It's a chawl. There is at the bottom is a shop. In front of both of this, I'll just use my cursor, laser pointer. In front of both is this is a shop again. It's only 1 foot deep, okay? And we call it the 1 foot shop, but basically it's kind of built into the wall of the shop and pays some kind of nominal rent to the shop at the back, right? And then of course, this is again another 1 foot shop. And then there are these range of hawkers over here, but there's also kind of another set of the homeless who sleep in the night around this place, but also take care of the wares, so it's a kind of deep relationship that gets built and complex levels of occupancy between these 5 layers. So those are the 5 layers. And often you'll find that some of the hawkers also rent, they keep their wares in some of the shops, the houses on the top. So those houses also get a kind of income out of the hawkers keeping their wares in the night in some of their houses. And then this is another, this is again a housing project. It's a chawl. Basically, a kind of a chawl is a housing type, which is single tenements, single two-room tenements that are strung along a corridor and generally has common facilities. The toilets are kind of shared. Now, almost 20% of Mumbai lives in houses like this. And if you look at this, again, it's an interesting type that these are basically two interconnected rooms. There's a corridor in the front, there's a corridor at the back. And so basically there's this one single bar, and then this is a single bar building, and they're connected by these bridges. Okay. So this is the Poonawalla Chawl. And again, so you'll see this is the back corridor. This is a bridge where you see a lot of people hanging around. People from different tenements will kind of hang around here. This is the front corridor. And you'll see that again, there are objects lying around. We call it orphan furniture because sometimes these are lying around for so long that you don't know who owns those anymore. So in some ways becomes common property. And then the house is quite interesting because these are the two rooms and it's a porous house. Okay, so there's a door at the back and there's a door in the front. Most of the time the doors are kept open or they are, see-through so that people kind of walking in and out are able to wave out to people, in the house. And this is an old couple who has been living in this place. They've been able to live in this place for this long because of the porosity of the house. And in the absence of state supported social security, the urban form becomes the social security. So there's people are kind of constantly watching out for them and looking out for them. And that's how the gentleman has been able to live in this place for 3 years, completely bedridden. And this is another interesting detail of the object here, this furniture piece, which is a kitchen cabinet, but it is able, the same door is able to shut the common room from the kitchen and otherwise. And so this is the same detail here. The kitchen cabinet, the door closes the kitchen cabinet, but in the night, the same door goes and closes the back door, the main door. So it's only in the night that door needs to be closed. And that kind of creates the porosity of the house, And there's an interesting, actually, Duchamp, the artist Duchamp had also a kind of detail like this. So I found it really interesting that there's a kind of very, very everyday space, somebody very, very ingeniously making this kind of a object that in some ways adds to the porosity and also the sociality of the place. And so this is what happens. These are the bridges that you saw in this image. So people are kind of hanging around over here. That's the porous house that sort of is a walkthrough almost. And in some ways, because people spend a lot of time outdoors, this entire building in some ways becomes a house. It becomes one big house. And again, there's again, another porous form. This is a potter's house, kind of housing. And you'll see that there is an external road there. There is the lower floor is a place where there's living happening, workspace. There's also living happening above. There is a place where they kind of burn the pots at the back. So again, a completely kind of porous entity, which is completely part of the urban space, an urban form. And this is another very interesting urban form. It's a completely self-built settlement. And if you look at this, what happens over here, the number of transactions are quite interesting. So you have at the lower level, you have a grocery shop. Above this, you have a kind of unit that is doing embroidery. And a lot of this is exported to all parts of the world. You have a worker's dorm here. The owner lives over here who's renting all of this up. At the back, you have this place which rents out large utensils to make food during festivals. Again, another unit that does embroidery. And then above, there's a library. And still above, there's a community hall and a mosque. All of this in this one little space, completely self-built. And as opposed to that, this is the resettlement that happens of places like this. So this is what the government in some ways provides. And if you look at it, it is, the distance between the houses is compromised because in some ways it's free housing. So who needs air, we're giving you space, so you don't need to breathe. So basically what happens in this thing is that the transactional capacity is reduced. And I'll come to what we then mean by transactional capacities as opposed to where people come from. So again, this is another slum rehabilitation project. People moved into houses like this with huge walls, compound walls in the front. And then again, the older houses that you saw, the bridge house that you saw, would be redeveloped into towers like this. So typically you would see parking at the bottom, and then this kind of these towers coming up. So yeah, this is what happens to them. And so this is an interesting chart that you see that this in terms of transactional capacities, and what we mean by transactional capacities is densities, number of activities, networks, transactions, care, livelihood, cultural settings, security, accommodation of diversity, but also imaginations, right? All of that, from the incremental settlement to the skyscraping apartments, the transactional capacities is what kind of drops, but the resources they consume kind of increase, because here you're consuming very little resources in terms of social and physical infrastructure, space, energy consumption, pressure on kind of city infrastructure, and other things increase on this side. Also, what is reducing is the blur. Like you saw that idea, the city form was corroded and blurred and allowed for series of transactions. That starts getting hardened. You have series of polarities kind of starting to develop, hardened kind of edges, which do not allow a kind of sociality. So that's the kind of urban form of transactional capacities. Places with high transactional capacities are also places of high energy and high conviviality. And then a kind of offshoot of transactional capacities is also transactional objects. So here you see a vendor who kind of has removed from the fence of a building, a kind of compound wall. She's inserted her little shop inside it. Or then this is also a kind of transactional object, the one that the door, the multi kind of, the door that shuts the kitchen and the unit outside. Or then these, which are, the 1 foot shop that you saw, the shop inside the shop, or a staircase shop. Now all of these become, or the 1 foot shop here, all of these in some ways become transactional objects, the cupboard shop, or then the day and night 1 foot shop. So when the day shop closes, the shutter of the day shop becomes a kind of night shop. So that was a term that we were interested in, transactional capacities. What is an urban form that has higher transactional capacities, and what is the urban form that kind of has a reduced transactional capacity? And more we were finding that with urban renewal, the transactional capacities of urban form were reducing. Okay, the second term that we were interested in was the idea of settling. Okay, so in settling, we also realized that a city is not a project, so in that image that I showed you first, there's a slow settling that was happening when negotiations happen between city occupants to create a kind of complex relationship, complex occupancies. Or then this, when an infrastructure project is built, the infrastructure project is always designed for efficiency, okay, to move quickly from A to B, or for other efficiencies in cities. But then it starts getting occupied and it settles slowly. It gets occupied in very different ways from what it was imagined. So spaces under the flyovers or the skywalk start getting used in different ways. There's a picnic that is happening here on the skywalk. Or then, there's a playground that happens below it. So this is another instance of settling. This was a project by the World Bank and where NGOs were involved. NGOs have also become super professional. There are huge grants, foreign grants that are in place. And then these are kind of infrastructure projects that were built in self-built settlements. But what happens on the ground is that, often these looked like, they were funded and, they looked like something was done because there's a huge infrastructure that was built. It's all the tick marks on the, funding documents and evaluations. But if you, go close, and evaluate it closer, you find that a lot of this infrastructure breaks down very soon because, you know, it's very difficult to maintain it and kind of keep managing this kind of large infrastructure. So as a kind of result of, or kind of example of settling, we found that, you know, there was something else going on the ground, that, you know, the lower level government officials who did not have a lot of stake, they weren't involved in the large sort of, you know, financing of the large infrastructure and all of that. They kind of worked on the ground with local contractors to start upgrading the self-built settlements. So this is one of those. And these are the lower level municipal officials who are involved in this. They got together with the local contractors, and they actually laid this, you know, infrastructure. They laid a sanitation infrastructure in this self-built settlement. Everything else remained. And then people would kind of come together and build their own sanitation infrastructures within their houses. People had enough money to do that, you know, and so they could incrementally kind of upgrade. And then these were actually, you know, nice places to live in, as opposed to those, you know, you saw those big towers where, you know, no light, no ventilation, but it's kind of all coming through a certain policy and a financing mechanism. So yeah, and then of course you see standards are also compromised, but it's fine because they're you know, they're nice kind of intimate livable spaces. So you see that there's a staircase here which would not, you know, follow any standards as such, but it works perfectly well. It's possible to climb up on that. There's a toilet that is sort of hanging above on top of a balcony, something that would be impossible to, you know, pass in terms of any kind of government documents or standards or something that would have to go through a municipal official. But these are, you know, nice intimate spaces. So, and then of course there were people whose houses were really small. It was impossible to build a toilet inside the house. And that's when the people of the neighborhood got together and assigned places in the street, you know. So you would have these are toilets that are outside, but they are, you know, they belong to certain families, right? So they would, and then there were also people who did not afford to build their own sort of, you know, did not have money for the tiling and all of the rest of the infrastructure inside. People got together and donated one tile each. So it's kind of, there was a bricolage of you know, infrastructure that made the kind of toilet as well. That's she with Bruno and this lady sort of live in that house, and, you know, they've incrementally built it. They could not afford to buy an apartment, okay, but in some ways, because of this incrementality, they're able to live in this place, and they slowly kind of, there's a garden that kind of grows outside their house, and, you know, slowly they're kind of incrementally upgrading and settling. And she was kind of ready for a paying job now, you know, when we took this photograph. So, and then this was another one, the same toilet that you saw. In many cases, they kind of broke down and you know, they got dilapidated. But here was a caretaker who was, you know, also settling the place slowly. So the first, in, you know, he kind of made this flooring himself, this rabbit in this place, and then, you know, kept kind of upgrading the place. At one time, we went to this place, we saw that there was this, there's an air curtain. These air curtains are used in places where, you know, large spaces where you want to cut the air between the air conditioned place and the outside, and you don't have doors. So you have these little air curtains located on top at the doorway. So this is kind of, he gets it from the scrap, and it works like a fan. So he starts, you know, using it like a fan in this place. The first time we went, it was located on a chair. The second time you went and saw that there were legs in it. So it's kind of consolidating slowly. And then the next time there's a landscape growing outside it. And then the next time there's a conference going on with contractors, small, you know, contractors who are kind of, you know, discussing, or, you know, the new things that they do in the self-built settlement, how they're making new houses. And one of them actually showed us this blue house and said, you know, he had managed to crack the ventilation problem because now he has this new kind of roof, which, you know, floats above, and it's a more comfortable space than the others. So that's again another kind of idea of, you know, looking at cities as they settle and you know, consolidate themselves, as opposed to many of the kind of modern projects that in some ways talk about, you know, clean slate, but often in that clean slating, there's a lot of violence that happens. Okay? And then the third one, I'll just come to the last one, trips and kicks. And again, this is something that we kind of came through with, a lot of our, I mean, these were almost sort of a side finding, when we were doing other urban research, we suddenly started finding that people in cities have trips and kicks, So for example, this was this was a wall, the 1 foot shop that we saw before. And this is the landlord, this guy without the shirt. Okay. He lives above and he rents this wall to this person who sells lotteries, and he sort of hangs around because he has nothing to do. He's rented this wall and he makes his money by renting the wall. So he hangs around this shop all day and, entertains these guys. And then then we found this other guy in the same, we were doing research on a software cluster in Mumbai. And then we find this guy who is, who collects outdated computer parts, because you realize that a lot of people who are interested in repairing and, have older parts, and once they get outdated, what do? You find this guy, he specializes in it. So they call him and he has a BMC, a municipal ward number and license, which is proudly kind of, painted on the wall. So again, it's a trip and kick that he has. And then there are, also others who have these trips and kicks. And then we found this other guy who has a shop that makes LED lights. But he sort of grew up watching this Bollywood film where one of the superstars kind of wears a suit with lights on it. And so he kind of, and that's how he decides he'll have an LED shop in Lamington Road, this electronic cluster. And then he kind of asks his father, who's a tailor, to stitch for him this kind of suit with lights and walks around this place, So, and then, I mean, and what basically I want to say is that there are trips and kicks through which people kind of, occupy city space. And that's something that we completely miss out in the way we kind of look at cities. And so, of course, these were lower level officials. It was their trip and kick to also kind of upgrade it, because there were no stakes in this. The NGOs were making money. The government was kind of, making money in that. But these guys were, it was a trip and kick to kind of consolidate this place and work with the local contractors. Or then this guy who is constantly upgrading the place. And I'll just end with the story of this guy. This is Pradeep, who has, again, it's in the electronic cluster in Mumbai, and has this small shop. And it's basically he repairs sound mixers. And what is happening is he shows us this thing, that the components are becoming smaller and smaller. A lot of this comes from China. And so like the components are becoming smaller and it's difficult for him to repair. Okay. So in some ways it's kind of this loss of, because of globalization and other things. So what he does is that because his repair business is reducing, what he had this entire shop was his. So what he does is he divided his shop into 2 parts. He kept one for himself. The other one became a warehouse, which he rented to another friend. And then somebody would come and, keep things all the time. The door was kept open. So he devised a little surveillance device for himself. He used a rear view mirror from his bicycle, and he kind of put it on his shop so that he could watch people go in and out. And then he did all kinds of, started collecting gourds. He did this, there's a blackboard on one of those shutters. And he did this mathematics, he did this math, and he told us that, this gentleman who visited him did this math for him. And he told him that he's a fool to keep his shop in such a, important place which is really, really kind of high real estate in Mumbai, So if he sells his shop and he retires, he will make much more money. But he says, what will I do with that money? I enjoy doing this. He spends like hours trying to repair that device. And because the components have become so small, he's not able to locate all the problems in it. So anyway, he doesn't get any money on it, but he spent time and he's enjoyed doing what he's doing, So he asks us back, what do you think I will do if I give the shop away? Because I enjoy doing this. And then he does all kinds of, because he has, again, spare time. He starts kind of, tinkering with all the objects in his shop. He makes this chair with a lower back, and he says, this is the ergonomically best designed chair ever. It's the most comfortable chair. Cannot beat any of your chairs that you spend thousands of rupees on. And then he shows us this kind of, he has redesigned his watch, which he says is geriatric friendly. because now he's able to, he says, you know, who designs dials which are white on white? You're not able to read it after 70. So he says, I make this dial which is black, and it's possible because it's contrast, and, you know, I can read it now. And he's like, there should be more geriatric friendly designs like that. And then he makes these pens out of, you know, stuff that is lying around in his house and in his shop. This is a, you know, he kind of bends it and heats it up with acrylic, you know, the acrylic that he has in his shop. This is a triangular piece, and then he puts a refill in it. And then he says, you know, this is a pen in disguise, because when I go to the bank, people steal my pens. And so I make this pen which doesn't look like a pen. So, you know, so people don't steal it anymore. So again, a trip and a kick, and, you know, he keeps making series of iterations. There are brass pipes that are lying around in his shop, and he makes pens out of it, and yeah, series of iterations of it. And so, yeah. So I think I have taken 35 minutes. I wanted to show another small work that we're doing, but I think I'll end there, because it's kind of, you know, I mean, it's possible to think of this, the three terms, you know, the transactional capacities, the idea of settling, and the idea of trips and kicks, through which we understand cities. So maybe I can stop there, and you know, we can have a discussion.
Okay, thanks a lot. And actually, there were some things which I think I noted also in the chat. And if you could even go back to your plot on, I mean, to your picture on the porous house, if you could actually show it again, because it was pretty amazing. I've never seen the so porous structures, first of all, of houses, because I mean, I've seen it, I mean, we've seen it with Mark, for example, in Georgia, where there are houses which have a very structure where you don't have a clear kind of, you have clear flats, but they are not walk-through, for example, first of all, flats. But here it's clearly also characteristics maybe of society, that you kind of have this fluidity and open structure, so that you don't have to stop, basically you don't have like clear blocks, or not a wall, but more like a door, which prevents one house.
Yeah, so that's the,
yeah, I think it's this one. So they are built like that, right? And which year they are built, and why is it so difficult to implement these houses in the future, like to scale them basically up?
Yeah. So this was actually built. This is industrial labor housing that gets built in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Okay, and so these are, but today a lot of these are being redeveloped. And again, that's the imagination, no? The apartment living has somehow taken over our imaginations. You know, this whole idea of privacy, and this kind of idea of segregated living, somehow that's the only imagination that is left, you know. And that's what the developers are also kind of promoting. But I mean, in many cases you realize that this kind of housing is where, I mean, it's kind of works for the old, it works for the young, perhaps I mean, for the really young, maybe the really young, the you know, people who really need privacy, yeah, perhaps this doesn't work for, you know. And but it's possible to have multiple ways of living, and that's what today we are kind of, you know, in some ways there's a kind of bankruptcy that seems like the apartment living is the only possible way, you know. So I think that's something that in some ways has to be kind of reimagined, because how does life and living take place, and what is the way in which urban form supports it, is something that is really kind of poorly understood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, but it's a characteristics not only of Mumbai, right? And you probably have it all around the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know if anyone has questions, because I can also go further with similar. Yeah.
I have a question. So, hi, I'm Akshay. Thank you, Rupali, for the presentation. It's very interesting. I just wanted to ask, so you showed like how people were living in chawls and in these porous structures, and then they are relocated to these kind of modern places, and then there's a lot of loss of like transactional capacities and the way in which these people are supported by each other. But if you have talked to these people, and how do they feel about being relocated to these new buildings, and do they appreciate that they are, do they think that their quality of life has improved or something like that?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good question. So I'll tell you about this particular one, the Mankut resettlement colony. It was resettled in 2005, and now it is 2021. So if you went there in 2005,